Just kiss the girl, man. Literally everyone is waiting for you to do it. So just do it, man. Why won't you? Well, if you or anyone you know have wondered the same question and have been wanting an answer other than Riot is just being cheeky with their storytelling, then look no further. Welcome to Champion Analysis. Garen, Katarina, high-ranking officials of rival countries, destined to be enemies from birth. And yet, there's something that draws them closer to each other. Could it be love? Or are we just shipping people that wouldn't normally be together? Like, let's be real, it's the internet. It's always gonna happen. But is there a romance? Surprisingly, there's more information on Garen having a crush on Katarina than both being in love. After his first encounter and battle with Katarina, it is said that Garen, the pride of the Demacian military and leader of the Dauntless Vanguard, returned from this battle breathless for the first time in his career, though some speculate that this was due to reasons other than exhaustion. You know how sometimes people can pick up on whether or not you like a person after they see your encounter with them? Think of it like that, except that this is a life or death battle rather than just casual lunch with your crush. So his fellow soldiers picked up on something from Garen's actions that leads them to believe he might have some feelings for Kat. But you know, people could be wrong. I mean, I one time thought this girl had a crush on me and I was super excited about it. So excited that when I met her boyfriend, I nearly broke his shaking hand. So, we can be wrong. However, there might be more evidence for Garen's affection. Going back to his lore, it states, the plausibility of these rumors was bolstered when, in every instance thereafter, Garen seized the opportunity to encounter the sinister blade again. So you take initiative when Katarina's involved, eh? There might be some attraction here after all. And although I want to refrain from using in-game evidence, there is also some merit to Garen's affection in his interactions with Katarina.
7002? Oh, I didn't see you standing there. Fear not, I'm coming. Demacia.
Riot wouldn't put this there unless they were trying to hint at Garen's crush. Using this information, there is a possibility for Garen having some sort of romantic interest in Katarina, which is great because if there was nothing, this video wouldn't exist. Now, why can't Garen act on his feelings and just invite Katarina out for a night in the town? The answer is quite simple. She makes Garen anxious. No, I don't mean butterflies in his stomach type of anxious. I'm talking about questioning his entire loyalty to his country and his family type of anxious. Yeah, this is pretty serious for Garen. Anxiety is that unpleasant feeling you get when you're nervous or uncertain about something that might happen, but this feeling is amplified when it comes to Garen. Whenever the thought about wanting to see Katarina pops into his mind, Garen is suddenly overrun by what's called moral anxiety. This is one of the terms that comes from the big guy himself, Sigmund Freud. In his psychoanalytic theory, a person experiences moral anxiety when he or she desires something that comes in conflict with their established morals or rules that they live by. It's pretty much the same feeling you get when you, as a decent human being, decide to play Fizz to rank up after losing. You know Fizz is a terror on the community that deserves to be deleted, but you really want to rank up. The terrible feeling that you get for playing Fizz is that moral anxiety. If you can't tell, I really hate Fizz. Okay, but a relatable example would be when you have a paper due the next day that you have yet to start, but your friends are all getting together to go out the night before. You know that sudden feeling that you get when you're being tempted to go out, but you tell yourself that you have to do the paper, yet you're still really thinking about it? That feeling that arises from that conflict would be considered moral anxiety, but like on a minuscule level. The level of anxiety that affects Garen is far greater than that example. So, moral anxiety, or any anxiety for that matter, is a result of conflict among the id, ego, and superego. These three are parts that make up the entire mind. The id governs only on the pleasure principle, meaning that the id only seeks to satisfy its desire for pleasure. This part of the mind would be where all of your desires would come from. You really want that new copy of Pokken Tournament in the store window, and that desire comes from the id. The ego functions on the reality principle, meaning that it attempts to satisfy the desire from the id with respect to reality. You see, the id really wants that copy of Pokken Tournament, but it doesn't see that it's behind a store window. All it knows is that it wants it. Therefore, the ego's job is to find a way to satisfy that desire in a realistic setting. The ego would walk into the store and attempt to retrieve the copy to satisfy the id. Now, the superego is guided by the moralistic principle, meaning that it provides moral standards for the ego to operate. So the superego's job is to remind the ego that it cannot just enter the store and take that copy because, well, that would be stealing, which goes against the superego's moral standards. The interactions of the three determine how we function. However, the superego is where we want to pay attention to the most, because it is overly involved in Garen's life. You see, the might of Demacia is dominated by his own superego. And that is an enemy you can't cut down, Garen. Alright, so Garen experiences moral anxiety whenever he thinks about Katarina. What does any of this mean? The superego is where all of your moral standards come from, right? But they aren't just born in you. Your superego grows from your experiences with rules and punishment while growing up. So as you probably guessed by now, our caretakers play a huge part in developing the moral standards of the superego. But your superego can be influenced by multiple factors outside of your home. For example, as a society, we have a set of laws that, when broken, have some severe consequences. We internalize these laws in our superego so that it can keep our ego in check with whatever it's doing. You can't just walk in and grab that copy of Pokken Tournament, because not only were you raised better, hopefully, but also because it is the law of society that you learn. And trust me, if there's any society that will hammer in its justice system into your superego, it's Demacia. Let's look at what the Demacian standards are for its own citizens. Since the Demacian people pride themselves as the moral vanguards of Valoran, they adopt seemingly draconian measures to ensure that their moral code remains the only code by which one may live within the country. Crime in any form is harshly punished. There are no misdemeanors within Demacia. While others may continue to criticize the harshness of Demacia's law, the Demacians stand by their convictions. Well, damn, there's no misdemeanors in Demacia? That's pretty hardcore. Like, you could literally be on trial for littering. So basically, every citizen has to keep up with Demacia's moral standards, or else they risk harsh punishment, as it states in the quote I just read you. This adds fuel to the superego of the citizens. In order to make sure they don't slip up at all, the superego has to be constantly working to remind them of the law and its harsh punishments. And Garen is no exception to the law. This society essentially adds more power to the superego of every citizen already, but Garen has a lot more fueling him than your average Demacian citizen. You see, parents tend to have the most influence on the development of the superego because they are the ones constantly present during the development of the child. Well, ideally. Unfortunately, this isn't the case for all children. Therefore, children learn the most about rules and develop their moral understandings from their parents or whoever is their primary caretaker. So stop blaming video games for everything, guys. Like, seriously, if video games were the cause of moral decay in people, our society would collapse due to the amount of people playing video games. Like, bruh. Anyways, back to the topic. Garen definitely got a strict moral teaching from his parents while growing up. According to the Journals of Justice... quick note, guys. I know Riot is reworking their lore so that the actual game of League of Legends is no longer a part of the lore, which pretty much demands total recall of the Journals of Justice as a lore source. But this is the only place where I can find more information on Garen's background, so I hope you guys don't get too upset with me. To make up for me using the journals, I'll exclude any information that involves him being a league champion. Sounds fair? Good. Garen is a part of the Crown Guard family, a truly extraordinary household whose every member has pledged his or her life to honored service. The head of the family, Marcus Crownguard, and his wife Lilia are both well-known, highly regarded officials of the Legislative Demacian Council. This doesn't sound like Marcus and Lilia just decided one day that every member of the family would be desired to serve Demacia. No, you see, Demacia is a constitutional monarchy, where the king of Demacia serves as the head of the state, and an elected council serves as the legislative body. The position of king is also inherited, which is why there have been 4 Jarvans, with our buddy J4 being the next in line to be king. As a monarchy, Demacia is governed by the various royal families, regulating the nation primarily as members of the Demacian Council. These houses have ruled for generations, meaning that their position is most likely inherited as well. And guess which family happens to be a part of the noble houses? The Crown Guard family. Therefore, this concept that every member of the family will be sworn to serve Demacia didn't start with Marcus and Lilia. It is a family tradition that has existed for generations. So Garen is not going to be raised the same way as any other kid from Demacia. No, he is going to be trained to uphold the family tradition and serve Demacia in whatever way he can, which will most likely eventually be as a council member once his father passes away. His superego is filled with the moral conduct that is expected of a member of the noble houses in Demacia. And this is on top of the strict moral standards that regular citizens have to uphold. So it's fair to say that Garen's superego is slowly overgrowing in order to accommodate for the strict society and nobility he was born into. Honestly, I think this is enough to send anyone's superego level skyrocketing. But let's add more to the mix. Not only does Garen have to uphold a family tradition of basically giving up your free will to serve your country, but Garen also has to be the shiny example of Demacian military. Training alongside your neighbors, sharpening body and mind in the pursuit of absolute discipline is a formative experience that shapes every Demacian towards inimitable virtue. Each and every one of our citizens who proudly serves our military is a shining example in these dark times. Okay, so these guys just have to be the shiny example of Demacian standards for the citizens. It's also stated that the Demacian military has a zero-tolerance policy. Their zero-tolerance moral code is strictly upheld by civilians and soldiers alike. In combat, this means Demacian troops may not make excuses, flee, or surrender under any circumstances. Clearly, you are being held to a higher standard than a regular citizen as a soldier in the Demacian military. So you can add the military's influence on Garen's superego levels on top of everything else we just discussed. But guess what? There's even more! Garen is a standard that Demacian leaders are compared to when they are being chosen. These principles are espoused to their forces by unrivaled demigods who lead by example. Garen is the paradigm to which these leaders are compared. Man, forget about being a regular soldier and a citizen. The fact that Garen has to keep up an image that is worthy of Demacian leaders to be compared to has got to boost the strength of his superego tremendously. He is not a regular citizen trying to obey the law. He practically has to be the living embodiment of Demacian law. And this is without mentioning the fact that he leads his own division and has created his own training regimen that is used as a standard for military training. His superego has to be working non-stop at this point because not only does he want to avoid the punishment from Demacia's strict laws, but he's also extremely patriotic. Like, seriously, this guy yells Demacia more often than Nintendo makes Mario games. So he does actively believe in the Demacian code, which he should because he was raised in that code. But there's also what to many people gives him the greatest sense of responsibility. His sister Lux. Lux looks up to Garen with such respect that she felt inspired to follow in his footsteps and joined the Demacian military at the age of 13. Wait, did I just read that right? Like, 13? No wonder you're so OP, you decided to get that Sailor Moon training instead of going to high school. Assuming Garen cares about his sister, then he definitely wouldn't want to slip up and let her down in any way. So add Lux's admiration into the massive list of superego fuel. Well now, we compiled a pretty good list of influences on Garen's superego, so let's check it out, and holy sh**! I really feel sorry for this guy, and not because he has a lot on his plate, but because this ratio of id, ego, and superego is not healthy for him. You might be wondering why this would be an issue. I mean, shouldn't this just mean that Garen is just another white knight that follows the rules to the T? Well, no. I mean, yeah, the description is right, but there's more to this. Remember when I talked about moral anxiety? It comes directly from the interaction between these three parts of the mind. The ego is supposed to be the force that allows people to make rational decisions concerning their desires. But when the superego has too much power, it can create some serious anxiety. Here's a figure showing the possible power ratios of the id, ego, and superego that could develop in a person. This is what I believe is currently affecting Garen. You see, a person that is dominated by their superego experiences extreme levels of guilt and feelings of inferiority when their desires clash with their moral standards. And just so you can get an idea of how serious this is, allow me to read you a list of some anxiety attack symptoms. A feeling of overwhelming fear, dizziness, shortness of breath, weak in the knees, feeling of going crazy or losing control. These symptoms can be accompanied by racing heart, nausea, emotional distress, vomiting. Pretty serious stuff. Now I gotta make the distinction that these are symptoms of an anxiety attack, not so much just general anxiety that any normal person would feel. But considering Garen's circumstances, I believe it's safe to assume that he is at a high risk for experiencing an anxiety attack if he were to slip up. And boy, Katarina is one heck of a slip up for Garen. Her vibrant, crimson hair, those alluring emerald eyes, her merciless skill with a blade. Clearly this is one talented and gorgeous woman, and Garen agrees. So why would she be a threat to Garen's mental health? Well, let's do what we did with Garen and examine Katarina, starting with her home country, Noxus. Noxus is regarded as the moral antithesis of Demacia. Well dang, that's hitting the mark straight from the start. Katarina comes from the rival country of Noxus, a country that stands behind the principle that only the strong survive, regarding the qualities of benevolence and compassion as signs of weakness. It's a bit clear to see how Demacia and Noxus can be regarded as opposites, and the fact that Garen shows some interest in a woman from his country's most despised rival is definitely going to cause some inner psychological turmoil. But it gets even worse. Just like all love stories, Katarina isn't just some random Noxian citizen. She is the daughter of General Dukotau, the finest Noxian assassin. She trained under many assassins, including her father, in order to become the sinister blade that we know her as now. Katarina is not only from Garen's rival country, but she is also the actual enemy on the battlefield that Garen is supposed to fight against. Now, do you remember that zero tolerance policy? Do you now understand why Garen would feel intense levels of anxiety because of his feelings for Kat? Garen is a pillar, a shiny paragon of Demacian morals and law, but he didn't achieve this entirely of his own decision. Garen has had his whole future planned out for him by being born into a family whose tradition is for every member to serve Demacia in whatever form possible. Garen has had to keep this tradition alive and now has to keep up with the standards placed on him by his family, military, and country. Garen cannot face his feelings for Katarina because of the heavy burden he has to bear. His superego is overfueled with Demacian moral standards that he cannot bring himself to accept any feelings for Katarina. You could even argue that he's in denial, a common defense mechanism used by people. Defense mechanisms are used by the ego in order to protect itself from overwhelming anxiety caused by its neighbors. Denial, when the person outright rejects their perception of the threatening situation present. This mostly happens on the conscious levels, meaning Garen is aware that he's denying his feelings for Katarina. When being accused of his possible attraction to Katarina, Garen chooses to just ignore them. I believe this is a case of denial, and it helps him. If he just continues to avoid the mention of his feelings, then he won't have to confront them. Garen might be implementing some sublimation on the unconscious level as well. Sublimation is a defense mechanism that involves the person diverting all of the energy that is generated by their conflict towards something more socially acceptable. You ever hear about those artists that paint whenever they're really frustrated or upset? That's a form of sublimation. You might be confused right now, asking me like, how is Garen doing anything like this? Does the Demacian military have like a recreational dance program for the frustrated soldiers? Well no, Garen seizes the opportunity to encounter Katarina whenever possible, but Garen isn't going out there just to look at her. He knows very well that he will be in a battle if he follows Katarina, or at least in some sort of opposition. She's the enemy, and that's how this is working for him. He takes the initiative to encounter Katarina in battle, thus he is technically fighting the enemy, which is socially acceptable for a Demacian soldier to do. Thus he's directing all of the tension from his feelings to an acceptable cause. The way things are looking, it seems as if Garen and Katarina will be forever locked in conflict. Garen's psyche has been infused with the morals of his family and country. It's almost going to be impossible to get Garen to understand that he's a person with his own desires and wishes, and that it's normal to feel the way that he does for Katarina. It's kinda tragic. Not because they're star-crossed lovers, no, because of Garen's superego-dominated mind inhibiting him from acting on his own desires. But at the same time, it's kind of necessary in order for him to not have an anxiety attack from all the pressure around him. Garen, man, I feel for you. I really do. Just goes to show you what you can learn about someone when you take a look inside. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. It took me a while to do this, but it was actually a lot of fun. It was like writing one of my psych papers for college, except that it was actually enjoyable. I didn't get fully into psychoanalytic theory, but I figured the video was getting too long, and I didn't think I needed to cover stuff like Freud's libido and death instincts and whatever. I started with Freud since he pretty much started the study of psychology. Despite his theories stemming mostly from patient observations rather than research, look, it's a long story, but point is, he got got the ball rolling, and this was my first video, so I figured why not start the new channel off with him. But yeah, let me know if you liked it, and I might just cover another theory with another champion soon. I wonder if Draven is still looking at himself in the mirror. Anyways, thanks for watching.